Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the dark, crowded streets of 19th century London. You're in the street Giles Rookery, a poor but vibrant neighbourhood where the air is thick with the smell of coal smoke and roasting meat. In the local pub, the sound of a fiddle plays as people escape the hardships of the day. And looming over it all is the brewery, a massive brick fortress containing a sleeping giant, a vat holding a sea of dark, rich porter. But let's be honest. In an age of early industrial power, disaster can come from the most unexpected places. You're far more likely to be drowned by a 15-foot wave of beer than you are to be struck by lightning. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. As always, I'd love to see where in the world you're listening from, so please drop your city and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. October 17th, 1814. The autumn evening settles over London, bringing with it a damp, bone-deep chill. As the sun sets, the respectable parts of the city begin to quiet down, their residents retreating behind closed doors. But here, in the parish of St. Giles, the night is just beginning. You are the watchman for this small, chaotic parish, and this is the hour your world comes alive. You light your lantern, the small, flickering flame, a tiny, hopeful star against the encroaching darkness, and begin your rounds. Your patrol takes you through the St. Giles Rookery, a place that is less a neighbourhood and more a living, breathing creature. It is a dense, tangled labyrinth of narrow, unpaved streets and dark, nameless alleys that twist and turn like the passages of an anthill. The houses are old, timber-framed tenements, their upper stories leaning so far out over the street that they almost touch, creating a permanent, gloomy twilight on the muddy ground below. There is no sanitation here, no clean water. The air is a thick, pungent soup of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, stale gin, and 100 different kinds of cooking. This is the London that the wealthy and the powerful pretend does not exist. It is a haven for the city's poorest souls. Irish immigrants, fleeing famine in their homeland, are crammed into single subterranean rooms, their brogues mixing with the sharp Cockney accents of the native Londoners. Discharged soldiers, forgotten after the long wars with Napoleon, beg in the doorways. It is a place of desperation, of crime, of profound grinding poverty, and yet it is also a place of vibrant, defiant life. As you walk, your lantern casts long, dancing shadows. You see the world of the Rookery unfold. From the open door of a public house, the sound of a badly played fiddle and a chorus of loud, drunken singing spills out into the street. Children, thin and barefoot but with bright, quick eyes, play a noisy, incomprehensible game in a filthy alleyway, using a pig's bladder for a ball. Through a grimy basement window, you see a family of 8 gathered around a small table, sharing a single loaf of bread and a pot of thin soup, their faces illuminated by a single candle. Your job is not to stop crime. That is a task far beyond any one man. Your job is to be a presence, a symbol of a law that is mostly absent here. You call out the hour, your voice a familiar, lonely cry in the darkness. 10 of the clock, and all's well. The words are a lie, of course. All is never well in St. Giles. But it is the ritual that matters. Your patrol takes you down New Street, a particularly wretched lane that runs along the southern edge of your parish. Here, the tenements are at their most dilapidated, but something else dominates the landscape. Looming over the small, crooked houses is a massive windowless brick wall, as tall as a church. It is the back of the Moe & Co. brewery, one of the great industrial titans of London. You stop for a moment at the base of this great wall. You can hear a low, deep humming sound from within, the sound of 1,000 barrels of beer slowly fermenting. You can smell it too, a rich, yeasty, almost sweet scent that is a constant presence in this part of the Rookery. You think of the strange, symbiotic relationship between this great engine of industry and the impoverished community that lives in its shadow. The brewery provides work for a few of the local men, and its product provides a few hours of cheap, warm oblivion for many others. The wall is immense, solid, a symbol of the modern industrial power that is changing the face of your city. It seems as permanent and as unmovable as a mountain. You look at the massive brick fortress, then at the small, fragile houses huddled at its feet, and you feel a strange, undefinable sense of unease. You pull your coat tighter against the night's chill, and you continue on your rounds. While you, the watchman, patrol the dark and chaotic streets of the rookery, a different world operates on the other side of the great brick wall. This is the world of the Mew & Co. Brewery, a cathedral of industry, a place of immense scale, power, and a simmering, contained energy. The narrative shifts, following a brewer, a man named George, as he begins his work amidst the towering machinery of this industrial giant. To step inside the brewery is to leave the squalor of street Giles behind and enter a world of awesome, intimidating order. The air here is not thick with the smell of poverty, but with the rich, sweet and wholesome scent of boiling wort, the sugary liquid extracted from malted barley that is the very soul of beer. Great clouds of steam billow from immense copper kettles, each one the size of a small cottage. The building is a forest of massive wooden pillars and a complex web of pipes, chutes, and catwalks. The sound is a constant, rhythmic, industrial hum, the hiss of steam, the rumble of grinding mills, and the rhythmic chuffing of the great steam engine that powers the pumps. This is one of the largest breweries in London, a marvel of modern engineering. It produces a single, iconic product, porter. It is the dark, heavy and nutrient-rich beer that is the lifeblood of the city's working class. It is a drink, but it is also a food, a cheap and reliable source of calories for the men who build the canals, unload the ships, and fuel the great engine of the British Empire. The brewery does not produce beer by the barrel, but by the river. And at the heart of this river stands the giant. George, the brewer, completes his rounds, his footsteps echoing in the vast, cathedral-like space. He walks past vats and tons of various sizes, but his final stop is the great fermenting vat at the back of the brewery. It is a structure so immense it defies belief. It stands 22 feet high, a colossal round tower of ancient oak staves, bound together by massive, thick hoops of solid iron. This is not a barrel, it is a building. It contains, at this very moment, over 135,000 imperial gallons of dark, fermenting porter. The pressure it exerts on its own walls is immense. It is a sleeping giant, its dreams a slow, steady, bubbling process of fermentation as the yeast works its ancient magic, turning sugar into alcohol. George climbs a long, rickety wooden ladder to a narrow catwalk that runs around the top of the vat. He opens a small hatch and peers inside. The air that rises to meet him is thick, warm, and pungent with the smell of yeast and carbon dioxide. He cannot see the liquid below, only the thick, churning, brownish-yellow head of foam, the krausen, that covers the surface. It is alive, a slow-motion storm, the sign of a healthy and vigorous fermentation. He closes the hatch and begins his final inspection, walking the catwalk around the vat's massive circumference, checking the great iron hoops. These hoops are the only thing holding the giant in check. They are the chains on the beast. As he makes his circuit, his hand resting on the topmost hoop, he feels a faint, unusual vibration. He stops, pressing his ear to the cold, thick iron. He can hear the deep, slow, internal grumbling of the fermenting liquid. But there is something else. A faint, high-pitched groan, the sound of the iron itself under a strain that is almost beyond its limits. He looks down and notices that one of the hoops, a massive band of iron nearly a foot wide, seems to have slipped, its alignment just slightly off. He pauses, considering. The vats always groaned. The pressure was immense, and the iron and wood were in a constant, slow battle with the tons of liquid they contained. He has worked here for years and has heard 100 such strange noises. He makes a mental note to mention the slipped hoop to the master brewer in the morning. It is a minor thing, a maintenance issue for another day. He finishes his inspection and descends the ladder. He has done his duty. The giant is sleeping, its dreams are healthy, and all is well. He does not know that the groan he heard was not the familiar sound of a vessel under strain. It was a warning, a cry for help from a chain that was about to break. He leaves the great hall, the sleeping giant at his back, and does not know that he has just borne witness to the final, quiet moments before the deluge. October 17th, 1814, mid-afternoon. The brewery is a symphony of industrial noise. The steam engine chuffs and hisses, the great grinding stones rumble, and the air is warm and thick with the sweet, heavy scent of boiling grain. For the men who work here, this is the comforting, predictable rhythm of their world. It is a world of immense power, a place where men have learned to command giants of wood, iron, and steam. But it is a power that is held in a delicate and dangerously fragile balance. The technology that makes this all possible is both ancient and modern. The brewing is a science of temperature and time, but the vessels that contain it are monuments to an older craft, coopering. The great fermentation vat is not a single piece of wood. It is a masterwork of hundreds of individual oak staves, each one perfectly shaped and fitted against its neighbor, their joints so tight not a single drop of liquid can escape. But wood alone cannot contain the immense, relentless pressure of over 100,000 gallons of liquid. The true strength of the vat, its very soul, lies in the great iron hoops that bind it. There are 7 of them, each one a massive ring of solid iron, forged by the finest blacksmiths, weighing nearly half a ton. They are the chains on the sleeping giant, the iron skeleton that holds the wooden flesh together. George, the brewer you followed on his rounds last night, is beginning his afternoon shift. The memory of the strange, high-pitched groan he heard from the top of the great vat, the sight of the slightly slipped iron hoop, has been a small, nagging splinter in his mind all day. He is a careful man, a man who understands that in a world of such immense pressures, small things can quickly become very large problems. He finds his superior, the master brewer, a formidable man named Mr. Hawes, overseeing the transfer of wort into a smaller vat. Mr. Prue. Hawes is a man of immense experience, a master of his craft, but he is also a man under constant pressure to meet the brewery's production quotas. Mr. Hawes, George begins, his voice respectful. I was inspecting the great vat on my rounds last night. The top hoop. It seems to have slipped. And I heard a strange sound, sir, a groaning, as if the iron were under an unusual strain. Mr. Hawes does not stop his work. He listens, but with an air of weary impatience. George, he says, wiping his hands on a rag, that vat is 20 years old. It has held more porter than all the pubs in London could sell in a year. It always groans. The wood swells, the iron contracts. The whole building groans. It is the sound of a brewery at work. But the hoop, sir, George insists gently. It's a full hand's breadth lower than the mark on the wood. Mr. Hawes finally turns to face him, his expression one of mild annoyance. It's the top hoop, George. The pressure is greatest at the bottom. That hoop is more for show than for strength. The vat is held by 7 hoops, each one thick enough to anchor a man-o'-war. Do you truly believe that the finest brewery in London is about to be brought down by one slightly slipped hoop? He claps George on the shoulder, a gesture that is both reassuring and dismissive. I will have the blacksmith look at it when the vat is empty next month. Now, get back to your work. This batch will not brew itself. George retreats, his concerns officially dismissed. He knows the master brewer is right in theory. The engineering is sound. The other hoops are immense, powerful. And yet, the feeling of unease does not leave him. For the rest of his shift, his eyes are constantly drawn to the great vat. It stands silent and immense in the cavernous hall, a dark, brooding presence. He watches it, listens to it, trying to sense its mood. He hears only the familiar, gentle bubbling of a healthy fermentation. The strange, high-pitched groan from the iron does not return. He begins to feel foolish. Mr. Hawes was right. He is a simple brewer, not an engineer. He is seeing ghosts where there are only the normal workings of a great machine. As he leaves the brewery at the end of his shift, the afternoon sun is beginning to fade. He casts one last look back at the great brick building. He has done his duty. He has reported his concern, and the matter is now in the hands of his superiors. He tries to push the nagging splinter of worry from his mind. It is, after all, just a slipped iron hoop, a minor thing, a problem for another day. October 17th, 1814, early evening. The sun has set, and a damp autumn chill begins to creep through the narrow, muddy streets of Street Giles. As the watchman, your duty is to the street, to the darkness, but your rounds always begin with a visit to the one place in the rookery that holds back the night, the Tavistock Arms pub. To call it a public house is a grand term for such a place. It is a small, low-ceilinged room, the air thick with the sweet, cloying smell of cheap gin, the yeasty aroma of porter, and the smoke from a dozen clay pipes. The floor is covered in sawdust to soak up the spills and the spit. The light from the flickering tallow candles and the great roaring hearth casts a warm, welcoming golden glow, turning the grim reality of the rookery into a place of temporary, hazy comfort. This is the living room, the courtroom, and the confessional for the people of this parish. It is the centre of their world, and you are its quiet, observant guardian. You take your usual spot in the corner, nursing a small beer, and you watch the life of the neighbourhood unfold. In one corner, a group of Irish labourers, navvies they are called, are spending their meagre wages. They are immensely strong men who spend their days digging the new canals that are the arteries of industrial England. Here, their exhaustion from the day's back-breaking labour dissolves in a haze of porter and the familiar, lyrical sound of their own language. Their laughter is loud and hard-earned. At another table, a group of women share a pot of gin. They are wives, mothers, and workers from the local factories. Their faces are tired, but their eyes are sharp with the wit and resilience of those who live their lives on the very edge of survival. They are the true leaders of this community, the ones who manage the households, raise the children, and hold the fragile fabric of society together. You see a family you know well, the Banfields, gathered near the fire for warmth. The mother, Mary, is trying to get her young daughter, Hannah, to finish a piece of bread, while her husband talks quietly with another man. They live in a basement tenement on New Street, one of the poorest and most crowded lanes, directly behind the great wall of the brewery. For them, the warmth of the pub's fire is a luxury they cannot afford at home. The publican, a man named Mr. Pye, moves through the room, a master of his small kingdom. He is more than just a bartender. He is the neighbourhood's banker, its messenger, its judge. He extends credit, he passes on news, and he knows, with a swift and practiced eye, exactly when to cut a man off and when to quell an argument before it can escalate into a brawl. You listen to the conversations, the great and small worries of the people. They speak of the rising price of bread. They speak of the soldiers returning from the long war with France, flooding the city and taking what few jobs there are. They speak of sickness, of births, of deaths. They do not speak of the great matters of Parliament or the King. Their world is here, in these few, crowded streets. As the hour grows later, you finish your beer and rise to begin your official patrol. You step out of the warm, noisy, and vibrantly alive world of the Tavistock Arms and back into the cold, dark and silent street. The contrast is immense. The pub is a fortress, a small, fragile bubble of light and community holding back the vast, dark ocean of poverty and hardship that is the rookery. You look down the lane towards the great, silent black wall of the brewery, which looms over the neighbourhood like a mountain. You think of the hundreds of thousands of gallons of dark liquid sleeping within its walls, the very substance that fuels the brief, fleeting moments of joy and forgetfulness in the pub you just left. The brewery is a silent, powerful neighbour, as much a part of their lives as the church or the market. You pull your greatcoat tighter around you and continue on your rounds, your lantern a tiny moving star in the darkness. All is quiet. All is, for the moment, well. October 17th, 1814, 10 of the clock. You finish the last of your small beer, the warmth of the Tavistock Arms, a pleasant memory as you step out into the sharp autumn chill. The pub door closes behind you, and the boisterous, happy noise is instantly muffled, leaving you in the profound, familiar quiet of your domain. The night. You are the watchman. This is your time. Your world is one of shadows and echoes. You light the wick of your heavy tin plate lantern, the small, greasy flame casting a pool of wavering yellow light on the muddy cobblestones. You begin your patrol, your heavy boots a slow, steady and reassuring rhythm in the darkness. The street Giles rookery, so recently a chaotic river of life, is now settling into a fitful sleep. The narrow streets are mostly empty. The only sounds are the distant, drunken singing from another pub, the scuttling of a rat in the shadows, and the soft, persistent drip of water from an overhanging eave. Your duties are simple, ancient, and essential. You are the eyes and ears of the sleeping parish. You check the doors of the small shops, ensuring their locks are secure against the night's thieves. You make sure the parish's few oil lamps, which cast a dim, feeble glow at the main intersections, are still burning. Your presence is a quiet deterrent, a small point of order in a world that is always threatening to slide into chaos. As you walk your route, you see the last vestiges of the waking world. You pass a baker's shop, its windows dark, but you can smell the faint, promising scent of the yeast for the morning's bread. From a high window, you see the silhouette of a mother rocking a crying infant. You see the tired face of the publican, Mr. Pye, as he finally bars the door of the Tavistock Arms for the night. These are the small human moments that make this wretched, teeming place a community, a home. You make your way down New Street, the narrow lane that runs directly beneath the colossal, silent wall of the Mew & Co. brewery. You stop and listen. The deep, internal hum of the great vats is a familiar sound, a constant, low thrum that is the heartbeat of this neighborhood. It is the sound of industry, of progress, of the great dark river of porter that fuels the city's laborers. It is a sound as constant and as reliable as the tolling of the church bells. You complete your circuit, your path taking you through the twisting alleys and back to the main thoroughfare. The moon is a pale sliver, mostly obscured by the London smog that never truly clears. The air is cold. You lift your voice, and the ancient cry of the watchman echoes through the sleeping streets. Midnight, and all is well. Your voice is a comfort, a reassurance to those who might be stirring in their beds. It is a declaration that the world is as it should be, that the ancient rhythms of the city continue uninterrupted. You have done your duty. You have patrolled your parish, and you have found it at peace. The drunks are in their beds, the shop doors are locked, and the great brewery stands silent and strong. You find a sheltered spot near the brewery wall to rest for a moment before beginning your next circuit. You lean your back against the cool, solid brick, the faint, deep vibration of the sleeping giant within a familiar presence. The night is quiet. The parish is safe. You feel a sense of simple, profound satisfaction in a job well done. You are a guardian, a keeper of the peace. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the deep, peaceful silence of a city at rest, a silence you do not know is about to be shattered forever. October 17th, 1814, late afternoon. While you, the watchman, find your peace in the quiet of the slumbering rookery, another man's shift is just beginning. Inside the great cavernous halls of the Mo and Co brewery, a skeleton crew is at work, their movements echoing in the vast, quiet space. One of these men is George, the same brewer who, just hours earlier, had his concerns about the great vat dismissed by his superior. The work is routine, almost meditative. He checks the gauges on the steam engine, he makes a note in the brewer's log. The air is warm and smells of yeast and malt. But George cannot shake the feeling of unease that has been gnawing at him all day. The memory of the slipped iron hoop, the strange high-pitched groan he heard from the iron. It is a splinter in his mind. He finds himself standing before the colossal fermentation vat, the sleeping giant that dominates the brewery. He looks up at its immense 22-foot height, at the 7 massive iron hoops that hold its terrible power in check. He tells himself he is a fool. Mr. Hawes was right. It is a machine of immense strength, built by the finest craftsmen in England. It has stood for 20 years. It will stand for 100 more. He is about to turn away when he hears it again. It is not the low, familiar rumble of fermentation. It is a sharp, high-pitched sound, a metallic scream, like a giant violin string being tightened to its breaking point. It is the sound of half a ton of iron, crying out under a strain it can no longer bear. George freezes, his blood turning to ice. He looks up at the topmost hoop, the one he had seen had slipped. He watches, helpless, as a tiny dark line appears on its surface. A fracture. What happens next takes less than a heartbeat, but in your mind, it unfolds with a terrible slow-motion clarity. The high-pitched scream becomes a single explosive crack, as sharp and as final as a pistol shot. The great iron hoop, the chain on the beast, snaps. For a moment, there is a horrifying, unnatural silence. Then comes a deep, guttural, groaning roar from the wood itself. The massive oak staves, now freed from their topmost restraint, begin to bulge outwards, bowing under the colossal, uncontained pressure of 135,000 gallons of liquid. And then, the world ends in a sound of pure, absolute thunder. The entire vat does not just leak or break, it disintegrates in a single, cataclysmic explosion. The remaining 6 iron hoops snap in succession, their sound a percussive volley of cannon fire. The oak staves, each one the size of a great tree, are blasted outwards like splinters. George is thrown from his feet by a concussive blast of air and gas that rushes out of the dying vessel. He lands hard on the stone floor, his ears ringing from the deafening, continuous roar. He looks up, his mind struggling to comprehend the impossible scene before him. The giant is awake. Where the great solid tower once stood, there is now only a churning, chaotic void. A colossal, 5-foot-high wave of dark, warm, frothing porter, filled with the splintered, tumbling wreckage of the great oak staves, is surging through the brewery. It is a river, a tsunami, a force of nature unleashed within the walls of his man-made world. He is frozen, a tiny, helpless figure in the path of a roaring, dark god. The wave is coming for him, and it is coming for the city. October 17th, 1814, 5:30 inches the afternoon. Inside the brewery, time has ceased to exist for the brewer, George. He is a small, terrified creature, frozen in the face of a force beyond all human comprehension. The thunderous roar of the disintegrating vat is not a sound. It is a physical blow that shakes the very foundations of the building. The air is thick with the sweet, suffocating smell of porter and the sharp, splintered scent of ancient oak. The initial wave, a 15-foot-high wall of dark, churning, warm liquid, does not just flow, it explodes into the great hall. It moves with the speed and power of a tidal wave, a battering ram of unimaginable force. It strikes a row of smaller casks filled with aging porter, smashing them to pieces and adding their contents to its own terrible volume. The wave is a living thing, a hungry beast of wood and beer. It picks up everything in its path, heavy wooden pallets, iron tools, grinding stones, and turns them into deadly projectiles, swirling within its dark, frothing chaos. The roar is continuous, a blend of the crashing liquid and the shriek of tortured, breaking wood. George, scrambling to his feet, does the only thing he can. He runs. He runs for his life, towards a staircase that leads to the upper lofts, the great wave of porter chasing at his heels, a monstrous, gurgling mouth threatening to swallow him whole. The wave, its power barely diminished, reaches the great rear wall of the brewery. This is not an internal wall of wood and plaster. It is a formidable barrier of solid brick, 2.5 feet thick and 25 feet high, a structure built to stand for centuries, a wall that separates the industrial world of the brewery from the fragile, human world of the rookery on the other side. The wall holds for a single pregnant moment. Then, with a deep groaning sound of 1,000 tortured bricks, it bulges outwards. Outside, in the narrow confines of New Street, you, the watchman, are just beginning your evening rounds. The afternoon is quiet, the air cool. You are exchanging a brief, pleasant word with the publican of the Tavistock Arms when you hear it. It is a sound unlike any you have ever heard before. It is not the familiar rumble of a carriage or the crack of a thunderstorm. It is a deep, gut-wrenching and continuous roar that seems to come from the very bowels of the earth. The ground shudders beneath your feet. Your first thought is of the great gunpowder depot in the city, that there has been a terrible explosion. You look towards the source of the sound, the great, looming wall of the brewery. You see a spiderweb of cracks instantly appear on the brickwork. You see the wall begin to bulge outwards, like a man taking a deep, impossible breath. And then, with a final, deafening explosion of shattering brick and mortar, the wall disintegrates. The sight that greets you is so surreal, so utterly outside the bounds of normal reality, that for a moment, your mind refuses to process it. From the great gaping hole in the brewery, a wave is coming. A colossal 15-foot-high wall of dark, frothing, churning liquid, black in the fading light, crowned with a head of dirty, yellowish foam. It is not water. It smells sweet and yeasty. It is a tidal wave of beer. You stand frozen for a single, timeless second, a statue of pure, uncomprehending horror. The wave roars out of the brewery, a living, monstrous thing, and crashes into the narrow street, instantly filling the lane from wall to wall. It picks up a stray cart and smashes it to kindling. It roars towards the flimsy tenement buildings, towards the basement where the Banfield family is having their supper, towards the back wall of the Tavistock Arms, where the barmaid is washing glasses. It is coming for them all. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. The moment of stunned paralysis breaks. Your training, your duty, takes over. You open your mouth and scream a warning that is utterly useless against the deafening roar of the flood. Run! For God's sake, run! You turn and scramble away, not out of cowardice, but with the desperate, frantic need to raise the alarm, to do something, anything, in the face of this impossible catastrophe. But there is no time. The wave of beer, a monstrous, churning industrial tsunami, slams into the rookery with the force of a solid object. It is not just a liquid, it is a battering ram, filled with the heavy, splintered staves of the great vat and the shattered bricks of the brewery wall. Its first victims are the houses on New Street, the wretched, flimsy tenements that huddle in the shadow of the brewery. These are not the sturdy brick homes of London's wealthy merchants. They are old, poorly constructed buildings of wood and plaster, their foundations already rotten from the damp, foul ground of the slum. They stand no chance. The great wave hits the back wall of the first house, and the structure does not crumble, it disintegrates. The wall explodes inward as if hit by a cannonball, and the dark, frothing torrent of porter smashes through the entire ground floor, carrying furniture, cooking pots, and human bodies with it, before bursting out the front of the house. The disaster is magnified by the geography of the rookery itself. The narrow, sunken lanes and the prevalence of basement dwellings, where the poorest families lived, turn the neighborhood into a death trap. The flood pours down into these subterranean homes, filling them in a matter of seconds. Inside one of these cellars, the Banfield family is gathered for their evening meal. One moment, they are in the dim, familiar comfort of their small, single room. The next, the wall of their home ceases to exist, and a solid black wall of liquid and debris crashes in, extinguishing their candle and their lives in a single, violent instant. There is no time to scream, no time to escape. There is only the sudden, shocking impact, and then the suffocating darkness. The flood, now channeled by the narrow streets, becomes a raging river. It sweeps down the lane, tearing the fronts from houses, its power so immense it lifts a sleeping infant from her cot and carries her away in the dark torrent. It finds the back wall of the Tavistock Arms pub, the place of warmth and community you just left. The wall, already old and unstable, collapses inward, the heavy bricks and timbers crashing down upon the patrons and staff inside, including the young barmaid who was clearing tables. You, having scrambled to the relative safety of a high stoop at the end of the street, look back into a scene of unimaginable chaos. The street you were just standing in is gone, replaced by a churning, waist-deep river of dark beer filled with the bobbing, broken detritus of dozens of shattered homes. The air is thick with the sweet, sickeningly strong smell of porter, mixed with the dust of plaster and the screams of the wounded and the trapped. You stand there, your lantern extinguished, your authority as a watchman a pathetic joke in the face of this industrial apocalypse. You are a witness to a new kind of horror, a uniquely modern catastrophe. This was not an act of God, like a lightning strike or an earthquake. This was a failure of iron and wood. The quiet, humming engine of industry that powered this neighborhood has, through a moment of catastrophic failure, turned on its masters and devoured them. The roar of the initial flood is beginning to subside, replaced now by the more terrible sounds of its aftermath. The groans of the injured, the desperate cries for help from within the wreckage, and the profound, stunned weeping of those who have just seen their entire world destroyed by a river of beer. The path of destruction is complete. Now, the accounting of its human cost must begin. October 17th, 1814, late afternoon. For Mary Banfield, the world is not the sprawling, chaotic rookery outside. The world is this room, a single subterranean cellar on New Street, a space no larger than a rich man's pantry. This is the home she shares with her husband and their two small children. It is a damp, cramped, and impoverished world, but it is their own. It is a fortress of sorts, its thick stone walls a barrier against the noise and the dangers of the street above. The only light comes from a single, sputtering tallow candle, which casts a warm, familiar glow on the faces of her family. She is ladling a thin, watery stew into bowls, the meagre meal for the end of a long day. Her husband is tired, his body aching from a day's labor at the docks. Her young daughter, Hannah, is chattering happily about a game she played in the alley. It is a scene of simple domestic peace, a fragile moment of warmth and family in a hard and unforgiving world. The first sign of the disaster is not a sight, but a sound. A deep, low, rumbling groan, a sound so powerful it seems to come from the very bones of the earth. Mary pauses, the ladle hovering over a bowl. "An earthquake?" she whispers, her eyes wide. Her husband shakes his head. A carriage crash on the high street, nothing more. But the rumbling does not stop. It grows louder, closer. A continuous, terrifying roar that makes the clay mugs on their small wooden shelf begin to vibrate. The ground itself begins to tremble, a low, powerful shudder that is unlike anything they have ever felt before. The children stop their playing, their faces turning to their mother with a look of confusion and fear. And then the wall explodes. It is not a crack, not a leak. The thick, solid stone and brick wall that separates their small home from the foundation of the great brewery simply ceases to exist. It disintegrates in a single, deafening, explosive instant. What follows is not a flood. It is an attack. A solid 15-foot-high wall of dark, warm, frothing liquid, moving with the speed and force of a cannonball, smashes into their small room. The single candle is instantly extinguished, plunging the world into a complete and total blackness. The sound of the roaring torrent is absolute, a deafening, chaotic violence that swallows all other sound. The force of the wave picks Mary up and slams her against the far wall. The air is driven from her lungs. She is submerged, tumbling in a churning, violent chaos of beer, splintered furniture, and the wreckage of her own home. The liquid is not cold. It is strangely, sickeningly warm, and it stinks of yeast and alcohol. Her mind is a swirl of pure, primal instinct. My children. She fights her way to the surface, gasping for a breath in the small, rapidly shrinking pocket of air at the ceiling. The cellar is filling with an impossible speed. She screams her daughter's name, Hannah, but her voice is a useless squeak against the roar of the flood. She is in a world of absolute blackness, her limbs tangled in what she thinks might be a broken chair. The current is a powerful, sucking force, pulling her down. She flails her arms, her hands searching desperately in the dark for the small, familiar shape of her child's body. She finds only the rough texture of the ceiling, the water already pressing her against it. Her last conscious thought is not one of terror, but of a profound, soul-crushing sorrow. Her small, safe, warm world, the fortress she had built for her family against the hardships of the rookery, has become their tomb. The last sensation is the burning in her lungs, the taste of beer, and the cold final embrace of the darkness. October 17th, 1814, late afternoon. While Mary Banfield's world is extinguished in a silent, subterranean blackness, another small world is still basking in its own warm, noisy light. Just a few doors down, the Tavistock Arms pub is alive with the familiar, comforting rhythm of an autumn afternoon. It is the social heart of this small corner of street. Giles, a haven of warmth and community against the cold, hard reality of the London streets. The publican, Mr. Pye, is polishing a pewter tankard behind the bar. A fire crackles merrily in the great hearth, its light glinting off the dark, wood-panelled walls. A group of off-duty brewery workers are laughing loudly in a corner, while a few older men quietly smoke their clay pipes, the air a familiar, pleasant haze. The person at the centre of this small universe is the young barmaid, Eleanor Cooper. She is only 14, but she moves through the crowded room with a practiced, cheerful confidence. She is a daughter of the rookery, and this pub is her life. She knows every customer by name, she knows their preferred drink, and she navigates their moods and their tempers with a skill far beyond her years. She is, in her own small way, the keeper of this fragile peace. She is at the back of the taproom, collecting empty glasses, when the world begins to end. It starts as a low, deep rumble, a vibration that seems to come up through the very flagstones of the floor. The men in the pub fall silent, their conversations dying mid-sentence. They look up, confused. "Thunder?" one man asks. But the sky outside the grimy windows is a clear, pale grey. The rumbling grows louder, closer, resolving itself into a continuous, deafening roar, a sound of impossible grinding power. The glasses on the shelves behind the bar begin to vibrate, the pewter tankards rattling against each other with a high, nervous music. The entire building begins to shake. Eleanor stands frozen, a stack of dirty glasses in her hands. She looks towards the back wall of the pub, the wall that separates this warm, safe world from the immense, brooding presence of the brewery next door. She sees a spiderweb of cracks instantly appear in the old plaster. Mr. Pye, his face pale with a sudden, unnameable terror, shouts her name. "Eleanor, get away from the wall!" But there is no time. The wall does not crumble. It does not fall. It explodes. It vanishes in a single catastrophic instant, replaced by a solid 15-foot-high wall of dark, frothing, churning porter. The wave, carrying with it 1,000 pounds of shattered brick and splintered timber, crashes into the small taproom with the force of an industrial tsunami. The scene of cozy, firelit community is annihilated. Heavy wooden tables are tossed about like children's toys. Men are swept from their feet, their screams swallowed by the roar of the flood. The great hearth fire is extinguished with a loud, violent hiss, plunging the room into a dark, swirling chaos. Eleanor, who was standing directly in the path of the blast, has no chance. The collapsing wall and the force of the waves slam into her, burying her instantly under a mountain of brick and heavy, beer-soaked rubble. Her life, which was so full of sound and light and laughter just a moment before, is extinguished in a silent, brutal instant. Mr. Pye, the publican, is one of the lucky ones. He had been at the far end of the bar and was thrown against the front of the pub, away from the main force of the collapse. He struggles to his feet, waist deep in the warm, dark, churning liquid. The room is a wreck, a hell of broken furniture, screaming, wounded men, and the all-consuming, sweet, cloying smell of porter. His mind, in a state of pure shock, can only form one thought, one name. "Eleanor?" he calls out, his voice a choked, desperate cry. "Eleanor!" But there is no answer. There is only the sound of the gurgling, receding flood and the groans of the injured. The heart of the community, the warm, safe haven of the Tavistock Arms, has been ripped out, and its keeper, the young girl who was its brightest light, now lies buried in its ruins. October 17th, 1814, just past 5:30 inches the afternoon. You are at the far end of your parish, your thoughts on the simple pleasure of a warm fire and a plate of mutton at the end of your shift. The air is still, the evening quiet. The day is ending as 1,000 other days have ended in the long, slow life of London. And then you hear it. It is a sound that has no place in the natural world. It begins as a deep, subterranean rumble that you feel in the soles of your feet, a vibration that shakes the very cobblestones. Your first thought is of an earthquake, a terrifying but not unheard of event. But the rumble is instantly followed by a deafening, explosive roar, a sound of catastrophic, grinding violence, like a mountain being torn in two. It is not thunder. It is not a gunpowder explosion. It is something else. Something new. You stand frozen for a heartbeat, your mind racing, before your duty takes over. You begin to run towards the sound, towards the heart of your parish, towards the brewery. As you run, the ground is still trembling. The air, which a moment ago was crisp and clear, is suddenly thick with a strange, sweet, and overwhelmingly powerful smell, the smell of the brewery. The smell of porter. Then you see the first of the survivors. A man, his clothes soaked, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending terror, stumbles out of an alleyway. He is followed by a woman weeping hysterically, her dress torn, covered in a dark, sticky liquid. They do not seem to know where they are going. They are simply fleeing. You round the final corner onto George Street, and you stop dead. The scene before you is so impossible, so utterly surreal that your mind refuses to accept it. The street is gone. In its place is a river. A dark, churning, waist-deep river of black beer, its surface thick with a foul, yellowish foam. The great, solid brick wall of the brewery has vanished, leaving a gaping black wound in the side of the building. The flimsy tenement houses that once lined the street are now pathetic, broken ruins, their fronts ripped away, their contents spilling into the torrent. The air is thick with the cries of the wounded, the screams of the trapped, and the desperate gurgling sound of the flood as it pours into the cellars and basements of the rookery. You are the watchman, you are the law. Your instinct is to impose order, to take command. But what command can you give in the face of this? How do you fight a flood of beer? You wade into the warm, sticky river, the liquid soaking through your woolen trousers, the stench of it overpowering. The current is still surprisingly strong. You see a survivor clinging to the wreckage of a doorway, his leg clearly broken. You help him to higher ground, his body limp and trembling with shock. You join a small, desperate group of brewery workers and neighbors who have begun the first frantic rescue efforts. They are tearing at the rubble of a collapsed house with their bare, bleeding hands, trying to reach a family they can hear crying from within. You look towards the Tavistock Arms. The back of the pub has ceased to exist. You see the publican, Mr. Pye, his face covered in blood, trying to direct the rescue of his patrons from the wreckage. This is a new kind of apocalypse. It is a domestic, industrial cataclysm. You are standing in the middle of a disaster that has no name, no precedent. The city has protocols for fires, for riots, for plagues. It has no protocol for this. The great, comforting engine of industry that loomed over this neighborhood, the source of its employment and its escape, has turned on them with a blind and terrible fury. You stand waist-deep in a sea of beer, surrounded by the ruins of the world you were meant to protect, the cries of the wounded echoing in your ears, the comforting lie you told yourself and the city just a few hours ago. All is well is a bitter, mocking ghost in your mind. All is not well, all is chaos, and the long, terrible night has only just begun. October 17th, 1814. The first wave of the flood has passed, leaving behind a dark, silent, and stinking sea. But the roar of the deluge is now replaced by a sound that is infinitely more human and infinitely more terrible. The desperate, pleading cries of the wounded and the dying, echoing from the wreckage. There are no official rescuers. There is no organized response. The city's authorities are miles away, unaware of the specific, bizarre nature of the cataclysm that has struck this small corner of the rookery. The first chaotic rescue effort is born not from authority, but from pure human instinct. The first to react are the brewery workers themselves. Men like George, who a moment ago were fleeing for their lives, now turn and rush back towards the disaster, their faces masks of horror and a terrible dawning sense of responsibility. They are joined by the neighbors, the residents of the surrounding streets who were spared the main force of the wave but felt the earth shake and heard the thunderous roar. They come running with lanterns and shovels, their minds struggling to comprehend the unbelievable scene before them. You, the watchman, find yourself at the heart of this frantic, makeshift army. Your official role is meaningless here, but your presence, your uniform, provides a small, desperate focal point of order. You begin to direct the chaos as best you can. "We need light," you roar, your voice raw, "more lanterns, and pry bars, anything to move this rubble." The work is a desperate, grim struggle against the wreckage. The ground is treacherous, a slick, ankle-deep soup of mud, beer, and debris. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the few flickering pools of light from your lanterns, which cast long, dancing shadows and create a scene of pure, hellish confusion. The air is thick with the sweet, cloying stench of porter, a smell that will forever be linked in your mind with death and destruction. The main focus of the effort becomes the ruined Tavistock Arms pub. Cries for help can be heard from deep within the pile of shattered bricks and splintered timbers that was once the back wall. The publican, Mr. Pye, his head bandaged with a strip of his own torn shirt, is digging with his bare, bleeding hands, screaming the name of his young barmaid, Eleanor. You and a group of brewery workers join him, heaving at massive, beer-soaked beams trying to clear a path. The work is agonizingly slow. Every piece of rubble you move threatens to cause a further collapse. After what feels like an eternity, you clear enough of the wreckage to pull two injured but living men from the ruins. Their limbs are broken, their bodies are bruised, but they are alive. The small temporary victory sends a surge of adrenaline through the rescuers, and they redouble their efforts. But for every life saved, a death is discovered. A team working at the flooded cellars of the tenements on New Street falls silent. They have found the Banfield family, drowned together in their small subterranean home, their final, quiet meal interrupted by the unstoppable wave. And in the ruins of the pub, as you finally lift a great heavy section of the collapsed wall, Mr. Pye lets out a low animal cry of pure grief. You shine your lantern into the gap. You see the small, still form of the young barmaid, Eleanor Cooper, her body crushed by the weight of the very building that had been her sanctuary. You stand back, your body aching, your hands raw, and let the others take over the grim task of recovering her body. You look around at the scene. You see the faces of the rescuers, illuminated by the flickering lantern light. They are the faces of ordinary people, brewers, labourers, mothers, husbands, pushed into a moment of extraordinary, desperate heroism. They are fighting, with nothing but their bare hands and their raw courage, against the aftermath of a disaster they cannot comprehend. The conflict is no longer with the flood itself, but with its consequences. It is a desperate, human struggle to pull life back from a tide of death, to find the living amongst the ruins of the dead, and as you watch them work, you see the true, stubborn, and heartbreaking heart of the rookery. It is a community that is fighting to save itself, one broken body, one heavy stone at a time. October 18th, 1814, the morning after. A pale grey dawn breaks over London, its light revealing the full, wretched scale of the devastation. The great river of beer has mostly receded, drained away into the city's sewers or soaked into the earth, leaving behind a thick, black, stinking sludge that coats everything. The immediate, frantic chaos of the rescue has given way to a stunned, sombre quiet. Now, the grim work of accounting for the dead begins. As the parish watchman, this duty falls to you. It is a task you have performed before after a tavern brawl or a case of winter fever, but this is different. You walk with the parish beadle, a ledger in his hand, not to record a single death, but to conduct a census of a cataclysm. Your journey is a slow, mournful pilgrimage through the ruins of the small world you were meant to protect. Your first stop is the wreck of the Tavistock Arms. The rescuers have done their work. They have recovered the body of the young barmaid Eleanor Cooper. She was only 14. You remember her from your visit just the night before, a bright, quick, cheerful girl, the vibrant heart of the pub. Now, she lies on a makeshift stretcher, a still, small form, her life extinguished not by sickness or crime, but by a bizarre industrial avalanche. Mr. Pye, the publican, sits on a broken barrel nearby, his head in his hands, weeping without sound. From there you proceed to the row of tenement houses on New Street, or what is left of them. You make your way to the collapsed cellar where the Banfield family lived. You knew them. You would often see the mother, Mary Banfield, sweeping the stoop, and her young daughter, Hannah, a girl of 4, playing in the street. Rescuers have cleared enough of the rubble to enter. They are found together, drowned in the dark torrent, a mother and child wrapped in a final, futile embrace. In an adjacent cellar, another life has been lost. A woman named Anne Saville, who was visiting her son for tea, was also trapped by the instantaneous flood. She was a mother, in the wrong place, at the wrong, impossible moment. Your grim tour continues to the most devastated of the tenements, a house that had been home to several poor Irish families. The scene here is one of profound communal grief. The survivors are holding a makeshift wake in the street amidst the wreckage. They have lost 3 of their own. A young boy, Thomas Murray, just 3 years old. His father, also named Thomas Murray, a labourer who had just returned from a long day's work. And their neighbour, John Farr, a man who had only recently arrived from Ireland, seeking a better life. The keening, mournful cries of the Irish women are a sound of a sorrow so deep it feels ancient. The final name on your list is the one that breaks your heart. In another collapsed house, they find the body of Sarah Bates, a child of 2. She was asleep in her cot when the wave hit, a life so new it had barely begun, snuffed out in an instant. You stand with the beadle at the end of your rounds, the sad, short list complete. 8 souls. In a city like London, A city that has known plague and fire, 8 deaths might seem a small number. But here, in this small parish, it is a wound from which the community will never truly recover. These were not statistics, they were your neighbours. You saw their faces every day, you heard their voices, you knew their struggles. The core of your being, the part of you that is a watchman, a keeper of order, is in conflict with the profound, sorrowful reality. Your job is to reduce this tragedy to a neat list of names and causes of death for a coroner's report. But your heart knows the truth. The truth is the sound of a mother's weeping, the sight of a child's forgotten toy in the mud, the empty space in a pub where a cheerful girl once stood. The great industrial giant next door, in its moment of catastrophic failure, did not just break a wall, it broke a world. And the 8 names on this piece of paper are the price that this small, poor community had to pay. October 18th, 1814, the day after. The grim work of accounting for the dead is complete. A heavy, sombre silence should have fallen over the rookery, a quiet space for a community to mourn its losses. But the City of London has other ideas. News of the disaster, a story too strange and too shocking to be believed, has spread like wildfire from one end of the metropolis to the other. And with the news comes the crowds. They begin to arrive in the morning, a trickle at first, then a steady stream, and by midday, a great teeming river of humanity that floods the streets of Street Giles once more. But this is not a flood of beer. It is a flood of morbid curiosity. You, the watchman, find your duties have transformed. You are no longer a rescuer or a record keeper. You are now a warden of a ghoulish spectacle, a zookeeper in a human zoo of gawkers and sensation seekers. People from every class and every corner of the city have come to stare. Wealthy gentlemen in their fine carriages point their walking canes at the ruined houses from a safe distance. Housewives from the respectable parts of the city walk through the muddy streets, holding scented handkerchiefs to their noses, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and thrilling excitement. Street urchins dart through the crowds, their faces alight with the novelty of it all. The sight of a profound and intimate tragedy has become the city's newest, most popular, and most grotesque tourist attraction. And then the scene descends from the ghoulish to the truly bizarre. The great river of beer has mostly drained away, but large, stagnant pools of it remain in the streets, in the gutters, and most of all, in the cellars of the destroyed homes. And the people begin to drink it. You watch, dumbfounded, as men, women, and even children equipped with pots, pans, and buckets begin to scoop the filthy, debris-strewn porter from the ground. They are not the grieving residents of the rookery. These are visitors, scavengers, opportunists. They drink it right there in the street, their faces soon flushed, their voices growing loud and boisterous. They are, in a very real sense, drinking from the graves of the dead. The atmosphere becomes a surreal and disturbing carnival. The air, already thick with the sweet, sickly smell of stale beer, is now filled with the shouts of the crowd and the raucous laughter of those who have become drunk on the spoils of the disaster. Enterprising street vendors, ever able to smell a profit, arrive on the scene. A man with a cart begins selling hot pies. A woman sets up a small stall, hawking cheap, fiery gin to the spectators. It is a festival of death. Your attempts to impose order are useless. You try to move the crowds along, to tell them to show respect for the dead, but they ignore you. You are one man, a relic of the parish's old, quiet order, and this is a new kind of chaos. A chaos born of the city's insatiable appetite for spectacle. You stand at the edge of the crowd, your heart filled with a cold, weary disgust. You look from the ghoulish, excited faces of the tourists to the silent, shattered windows of the houses where the victims' families are now huddled in their grief. This is the final, cruel indignity. Their private, unimaginable sorrow has been turned into a public entertainment. Their homes have become a stage, and their lost loved ones are the unseen actors in a play for the amusement of strangers. You realize that a disaster has two deaths. The first is the quiet, personal death of the victims, the tearing of the fabric of a family and a community. The second is the loud public death of their memory, as their story is consumed, distorted, and turned into a piece of shocking gossip, a thrilling tale to be told over a pint in a tavern, a world away from the true grim reality of the suffering. You, the watchman, are the only one left to guard the sanctity of that true, terrible memory. October 20th, 1814. 3 days have passed since the deluge. The bizarre carnival is over. The crowds of curious gawkers, having had their fill of the spectacle, have returned to their own, safer parts of the city, leaving the rookery to its grief. The dead have been carried away, and a sombre, wounded quiet has fallen over the ruined streets. The physical wreckage is slowly being cleared, but the ghost of the disaster lingers on, not as a sight, but as a smell so powerful and so pervasive it has become a new, invisible wall around the neighborhood, imprisoning the survivors in the memory of their trauma. It is the first thing you notice when you wake, and the last thing you are aware of before you fall into a fitful sleep. The entire world of street, Giles, is saturated with the smell of old, stale, and slowly souring beer. It is not a simple scent. It is a complex, evolving entity. On the first day, it was the rich, almost sweet, malty aroma of fresh porter, a smell that, for all its association with the disaster, was still a familiar and almost wholesome part of the neighborhood's life. But now, as the thousands of gallons of beer that have soaked into the earth, the wood, and the very foundations of the houses begin to ferment and spoil under the cool autumn sky, the smell is changing. It is growing a sour, vinegary edge, a pungent, yeasty tang that stings the back of your throat and clings to your clothes and hair. It is the smell of decay, of a living thing dying and rotting in the open air. It gets into everything. The small loaf of bread on your table tastes of it. The water you draw from the parish pump seems to be tainted with it. When you close the door to your small room, the smell is already there, waiting for you, having seeped into the very fabric of the building. As you make your nightly rounds, the smell is your constant, cloying companion. It is a physical presence in the darkness, a thick, sweetish fog that you must walk through. It is the ghost of the flood, and it is inescapable. The smell becomes the new mark of the rookery. People from other parishes hurry through your streets, their faces pinched, holding handkerchiefs to their noses. The residents of Street Giles, who have survived a cataclysm, are now further stigmatized, branded by the very air they breathe. They are the people who live in the great stink. You watch as the community begins the slow, arduous process of cleaning up. It is a battle not just against the physical debris, but against this invisible, olfactory enemy. Women scrub their floors with lye and sand, but the smell remains, baked into the wood. Men shovel the dark, sticky, beer-soaked sludge from the gutters, but the scent lingers in the cobblestones. The cellars are the worst. They are still pools of dark, stagnant liquid, and the work of bailing them out is a journey into a nauseating, alcoholic hell. You stand at the entrance to what was once the Banfields' home, watching two men haul bucket after bucket of the foul-smelling liquid out of the dark cellar where the family drowned. The smell that rises from that dark hole is a potent, concentrated brew of beer, mud, and death. It is a smell you know will haunt your dreams for the rest of your life. You realize that a memory is not just a picture in your mind, it is a taste, a sound, a smell. The visual horror of the flood, the sight of the collapsing buildings, will perhaps fade with time. But this smell is an indelible stain on the memory of every person who has survived this. Years from now, the scent of a brewery or the smell of a spilled pint in a pub will be enough to bring them right back to this moment, to this place of ruin and sorrow. The streets will be cleared, the houses will be rebuilt, but the ghost of the Great Beer Flood will live forever in the very air of this neighborhood. October 26th, 1814. A week has passed. The last of the dark, stinking sludge has been shoveled from the streets of Giles, and the neighborhood has begun the slow, arduous process of grieving and rebuilding. The bizarre carnival of Gawkers is gone. The raw shock has subsided into a deep, quiet ache of loss. Now, the official machinery of the law, which was so absent during the disaster, finally grinds into motion. A formal coroner's inquest is convened to answer a simple yet impossibly complex question: how did 8 souls lose their lives in a flood of beer? The inquest is held not in a grand courthouse, but in a large, drafty room of a nearby public house that was spared the flood. The space is crowded and somber. A stern-faced coroner presides over the proceedings, and a jury of 12 local shopkeepers and businessmen has been assembled, solid, respectable men who listen to the testimony with grim, serious faces. You are there, not as the watchman but as an official witness for the parish. The owners of the Mew and Co brewery are present, their fine clothes a stark contrast to the humble attire of the rookery's residents. They are flanked by their lawyers, their faces calm, confident, and unreadable. The first to be called is the brewer, George. He is a nervous wreck, his hands twisting a worn cap. He recounts the events of that afternoon with a quiet, halting voice. He tells of the routine, of the sounds of the brewery, of the great, sleeping vat. And then, his voice dropping, he tells of his warning. I told him, George says, looking at the jury. I told Mr. Hawes, the master brewer. I said the top hoop had slipped. I told him I heard a strange sound from the iron. A lawyer for the brewery stands. And what did Mr. Hawes, a man with 20 years of experience, say to you? He said the vat's always grown, George stammers. He said the top hoop was not essential. He said he would have it looked at next month. The testimony hangs in the air. A clear, simple account of a warning given and a warning dismissed. Next to testify is the publican, Mr. Pye. His head is still bandaged. His voice cracks with emotion as he describes the final, peaceful moments in his pub, the Tavistock Arms. He talks about his young barmaid, Eleanor Cooper. She was a good girl, he says, his voice breaking. A bright, happy girl, the heart of the place. He then describes the thunderous roar, the explosion of the back wall, and the chaos that followed. He does not offer theories or blame. He simply tells the story of his loss. Then you are called. You are the watchman, a figure of official authority. You speak clearly and methodically. You recount your patrol, the ordinary quiet of the evening. You describe the sound, the shaking of the ground. You describe being the first on the scene, the unbelievable sight of a river of beer in the street, the ruined houses, and the beginning of the desperate rescue. You present the facts as you saw them, a calm, sober account of an insane event. Throughout the day, you listen to the testimony. You listen to the brewers speak of the vat as a marvel of engineering, a vessel of unparalleled strength that failed for no discernible reason. You listen to the survivors speak of their lost loved ones, their voices thick with a grief that this formal, legal proceeding can barely contain. A clear picture emerges. A story of a small, ignored warning and a subsequent catastrophic failure. You look at the faces of the jury. They are men of property, of business. They understand ledgers and profits. But can they understand the terror of a basement filling with a dark, warm torrent? Can they comprehend the loss of a child drowned in a river of porter? The conflict is no longer between the people and a natural disaster. It is a conflict between the immense, impersonal power of an industrial company and the small, fragile lives that were shattered in its shadow. The coroner gives his final instructions to the jury. They file out of the room to deliberate. A heavy silence descends. You wait, caught between the clear testimony of what happened and the unsettling feeling that in a world of wealth and influence, the truth is not always enough to secure justice. An Act of God, October 26th, 1814. The inquest room is suffocatingly quiet. The testimony is finished. The stories of loss have been told. The technical explanations have been given. Now, there is only the waiting. You stand at the back of the crowded room, a silent observer of this final, formal act. On one side of the room sit the owners of the brewery, their faces impassive, their lawyers occasionally whispering in their ears. On the other side sit the survivors from the rookery, a small, huddled group of the bereaved. They are the families of the dead, their faces pale and weary, their plain, dark clothes a stark contrast to the fine wool and silk of the brewery's representatives. They are two different worlds, brought together by a shared disaster, now waiting for a single word: justice. The jury is only out for a short time. When they file back into the room, their faces are as grim and unreadable as the coroner's. They take their seats. A profound, tense silence descends, so deep you can hear the soft hiss of the gas lamp on the wall. The coroner turns to the jury foreman, a stout, serious-looking butcher you recognize from the local market. "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreman rises, a piece of paper trembling slightly in his large hand. He clears his throat and reads. His voice is a low, formal drone. The language of the court, a strange and alien tongue in this room filled with such raw, human grief. He reads the names of the 8 dead, one by one, each name a hammer blow in the silent room. Eleanor Cooper, Mary Banfield, Hannah Banfield, Anne Saville, Thomas Murray, and his son, also Thomas Murray, John Farr, Sarah Bates. And then he comes to the cause. We, the jury, having heard the evidence presented, do find that the deceased came to their deaths. He pauses, taking a deep breath. Casually, accidentally, and by misfortune. A low murmur, a gasp of disbelief, comes from the families of the victims. But the foreman is not finished. He reads the final, official, and most devastating line. The cause of the structural failure of the great vat, he declares, his voice ringing with the hollow finality of the law, is hereby declared an act of God. An act of God. The words hang in the air. A piece of legal and theological absurdity. You look at the faces of the brewery owners. There is no triumph, no gloating. There is only a quiet, almost imperceptible release of tension, a subtle relaxing of the shoulders. They have been absolved. Their great engine of industry, their sleeping giant, has been deemed a force of nature, as blameless as a lightning strike or an earthquake. Then you look at the faces of the bereaved. You see the mother of Mary Banfield, a woman who has just lost her daughter and her granddaughter. Her face is a mask of pure, uncomprehending confusion. She does not understand the legal language. She only understands that her family is gone, drowned in a river of beer from a vat that a man had warned was failing. How can that be the work of God? You, a man of the law, a watchman, feel a cold, rising anger in your gut. You heard George, the brewer, give his testimony. You heard him speak of the slipped iron hoop. This was not a mystery. It was a failure of metal, a failure of maintenance, a failure of men. But the jury, 12 respectable businessmen, have chosen to see it differently. Perhaps they are thinking of their own businesses, their own workshops, the own potential for accidents. Perhaps they see the brewery not as a negligent party, but as a fellow victim, a brother in commerce who has suffered a great financial loss. The inquest is adjourned. The formal machinery of justice has done its work and moved on. The crowd begins to disperse. You watch the brewery owners and their lawyers leave, talking in low, satisfied tones. Then you watch the families of the dead shuffle out into the cold afternoon, their faces empty, their hope for some kind of accountability, for some acknowledgement of their loss, now completely extinguished. You are left with a profound and bitter understanding. The conflict was not between the truth and a lie. It was between the small, inconvenient truth of a slipped iron hoop and the much larger, more powerful truth of commerce and property. The law has not been used to find justice for the dead, but to protect the interests of the living and the wealthy. The 8 souls lost to the flood have not been victims of a negligent company. They have been officially and forever designated as victims of a random, blameless, and entirely unavoidable act of God. November 1814. The first of the winter rains have begun, turning the already muddy streets of Street Giles into a cold, brown quagmire. The physical wreckage of the flood has been mostly cleared away, but the human wreckage remains. The families of the dead grieve in silence. The families who lost their homes are crammed into the already overflowing tenements of their neighbours. Life in the rookery, a place already defined by hardship, has become even harder. There has been no official compensation, no relief fund from the city. There is only a small collection of charitable donations, a few shillings offered in pity, not in justice. The great brewery, however, is a hive of activity. The owners of Mew & Co., having been legally absolved of all blame by the Act of God verdict, have wasted no time. A new, even larger fermentation vat is already being constructed. The thunderous sound of industry, the familiar hum and hiss of the great machines, has returned, a constant, mocking reminder of the power that destroyed this neighbourhood and has suffered no consequences. But for the brewery owners, absolution from blame is not the same as financial recovery. They have suffered a catastrophic loss, not of life, but of product. Over 100,000 gallons of valuable porter, their primary asset, was lost in the flood. It is a loss they have no intention of bearing alone. The scene shifts from the grimy, powerless world of Street Giles to the grand, powerful world of Westminster. The story moves to a committee room in the Houses of Parliament. Here, in a chamber of polished wood and high ceilings, the owners of the brewery make their case. They do not come as penitents. They come as businessmen. Their argument, presented by a smooth and eloquent lawyer, is a masterpiece of commercial logic. They explain to the committee that the excise tax, a substantial duty levied by the Crown, is paid on beer as it is brewed, not as it is sold. Therefore, they have already paid thousands of pounds in taxes on the very porter that now lies seeping into the soil of Street Giles. They frame the disaster not as a human tragedy, but as an unjust and unforeseen loss of taxable assets. To force them to bear both the loss of the product and the loss of the tax already paid upon it would be, their lawyer argues, a crippling blow to a vital English industry, an industry that employs hundreds and contributes a great deal to the nation's coffers. It would be, in a word, unfair. You, the watchman, hear of this petition not through any official channel, but as a piece of astonishing gossip from a clerk you know who works in the Treasury. You listen, your mind reeling with a sense of stunned, bitter disbelief. You think of the immense formal machinery of the state, the committees, the lawyers, the members of Parliament, all being mobilized to debate the financial losses of a wealthy company. You contrast this with the complete and utter absence of any such effort for the 8 souls who lost their lives. Their losses were not calculated in gallons or in pounds sterling. Their losses were absolute, and they have been met with nothing but a coroner's verdict of misfortune and a few charitable pennies. A few weeks later, the news arrives. Parliament has been persuaded. They have granted the Mew & Co. brewery a full rebate for the lost taxes. The sum is an immense £7,250. It is a fortune, a sum so large it is almost impossible for the residents of the rookery to even comprehend, an amount that could rebuild their entire neighbourhood 10 times over. You are on your nightly patrol when you hear the news. The wind is cold. A light, miserable drizzle is falling. You look at the houses of the bereaved, at the dark windows where families are trying to piece their shattered lives back together. And you look at the great, dark wall of the brewery, now fully repaired, its chimneys once again puffing smoke into the night sky. The final, cruelest chapter of the tragedy is now complete. The inquest declared that no human was to blame. And now, Parliament has declared that the only true, measurable victim of the disaster was the brewery itself. The core conflict of this entire affair has been laid bare. The lives of the poor, the grief of the forgotten, these are like the beer itself, things that spill out, soak into the dirt, and are eventually forgotten. But the financial loss of a powerful company, that is a matter of national importance. a wrong that must be righted by the highest powers in the land. The taste of injustice is as thick and as bitter as the dregs of porter in a gutter. Spring 1815. The long, hard winter has passed, and a new season has come to London. The city, in its relentless, forward-moving way, has largely forgotten the strange, small tragedy that took place in the street Giles rookery. The inquest is over, the brewery's tax has been refunded, and the newspapers have moved on to new sensations. But here, in the narrow, muddy streets of your parish, the story is not over. The flood is not a piece of history, it is a living ghost. The physical rebuilding has begun, a slow and painful process. The ruined tenements have been torn down, and the slow work of laying new foundations is underway. The work is not being done by the city or by the brewery, but by the community itself, by the families and their neighbours, who are patching their broken world back together with their own hands and what little money they can spare. As the watchman, you are a constant witness to this slow resurrection. You see the men of the parish, after a full day of their own grueling labour, working by candlelight to help a neighbour lay the bricks for a new wall. You see the women, who have taken in the orphaned and the widowed, sharing their meagre meals. The community, abandoned by the official structures of power, has been forced to turn inward, its bonds of kinship and shared suffering now stronger than ever. But as the physical structures are rebuilt, you notice a different kind of construction taking place. The memory of the flood is being rebuilt, transformed from a raw, traumatic event into a local legend, a dark folktale that will be passed down through generations. You see it in the children's games. They no longer play at soldiers or at chasing hoops. You see them building small dams of mud in the gutters, and then gleefully smashing them, shouting the beer flood. The beer flood. As the dirty water runs down the lane, you hear it in the stories told in the rebuilt Tavistock Arms pub. You sit in your corner and you listen as a man who survived the flood tells the tale to a newcomer, but the story has already begun to change. In his telling, the great vat is no longer just a piece of faulty industrial equipment. It is a sleeping monster, a slumbering giant. The flood is not just a liquid. It is a dark, sentient beast that roared out of its lair to devour the innocent. The story has become a piece of folklore, a way for the community to process a horror that is too random and too industrial to comprehend. They have given the disaster a face, a personality, a narrative. They are taming their trauma by turning it into a tale. You listen to these stories, and you, the man who saw it all, are the only one who remembers the mundane, bureaucratic truth. You remember the simple, technical reality of a slipped iron hoop. You remember the cold, legalistic language of the coroner's inquest. You remember the cynical, financial logic of the tax rebate. You stand your watch on a quiet spring night, looking at the new houses slowly rising from the rubble. The neighbourhood is healing, but its memory of the event is being mythologized. The complex truth of negligence, of social injustice, of a new and dangerous industrial age, is being smoothed over, replaced by a simpler, more dramatic story of a monstrous flood. You realize this is how history is truly made. It is not just the facts and the figures that you, the chronicler, so value. It is the stories that people tell themselves afterwards to make sense of the senseless. The core conflict is not between what happened and what didn't, but between the cold, hard, and often unsatisfying reality of an event and the warmer, more meaningful, and more human shape of a legend. You know that in a generation, no one will remember the slipped iron hoop or the coroner's verdict. They will only remember the story. The tale of the night a great river of beer rose up and swallowed their streets. You, the watchman, are the keeper of the facts. But the community, in its collective grief and resilience, has become the keeper of the truth. New Year's Day, 1815. A new year has begun. The City of London, in its relentless, forward-moving way, has already buried the memory of the beer flood under 1,000 new headlines, 100 new scandals, and the great ongoing drama of the final days of the Napoleonic Wars. The tragedy of Street Giles is already a piece of old news, a curious anecdote for the coffeehouses of the wealthy. But for you, the story is not over until the final account has been written. You sit in your small, cold room, the city outside, silent under a blanket of winter frost. Your shift is over. Before you lies not an official parish logbook, but a small private diary you have kept for years. This is where you keep the real accounts, the human stories that will never be recorded in a coroner's report or a parliamentary record. Tonight, you will write the final entry for the great beer flood. You dip your quill in the inkpot, the scratching of the nib, the only sound in the stillness. You begin to write not just a report, but a testament. You write of the neighborhood as it was before, a place of hardship, yes, but also of a fierce, vibrant life. You write of the warm, noisy sanctuary of the Tavistock Arms, and you list the names of the dead, not as casualties, but as the people you knew, the cheerful barmaid, Eleanor, the tired mother, Mary, and her small daughter, Hannah. You write down all 8 names, a quiet, personal monument to the forgotten. You write of the brewery, the great, humming giant that was the source of the neighborhood's life and its death. You write of the brewer's warning, the simple, mundane fact of the slipped iron hoop, the small, human error that the law decided was an act of God. You describe the thunderous roar of the vat's collapse, the impossible, terrifying sight of the great, dark wave as it smashed into the fragile homes of the rookery. You write of the aftermath. You write of the desperate, heroic rescue efforts of the neighbors and the brewery workers digging through the rubble with their bare hands. You write of the bizarre, ghoulish carnival of the following days, the city consuming its own tragedy as a form of entertainment. You write of the cloying, inescapable smell that haunted the streets for weeks, the very air a constant funereal reminder. And finally, you write of the cold, passionless machinery of justice. You describe the inquest, where the grief of the bereaved was met with the calm, confident denials of the brewery's lawyers. You write the 3 final, insulting words of the verdict, act of God, and you record the last, cruel twist of the knife. The £7,000 given back to the company in taxes, a fortune that rendered the lives of the poor as nothing more than a minor, unfortunate expense. You put down your quill, the long entry complete. You have recorded the full, true story as you witnessed it. You have done your duty as a watchman, not just of the streets, but of the memory of what happened here. You understand now the true nature of the conflict. It was not a battle between a community and a flood. It was a battle between 2 different worlds, crammed together in the heart of a great city. It was the conflict between the fragile, chaotic, human world of the rookery and the powerful, orderly, and inhuman world of the new industrial age. And in that battle, the machine, for one terrible afternoon, had won. The law and the government, in their cold commercial logic, had sided not with the people, but with the machine. You close your diary and look out your window at the sleeping, silent city. The brewery is dark, but you know its great vats are once again full, sleeping giants waiting for the dawn. Your small, private record is all that is left. It is a silent testament, a final watchman's cry into the darkness, a story for the forgotten dead of a strange and terrible London tragedy. And so, the strange, dark tide of the London beer flood recedes into history, a bizarre and tragic footnote in the story of a great city. The chaos of that long-ago day can now fade away, leaving only the quiet of your own room. Let the roar of the flood and the cries of the crowd fall silent. Your own busy day is done, and the only thing that matters now is the gentle, peaceful calm of the night. If this strange tale from the past helped you to unwind, a quiet like is always deeply appreciated. And if you wish to join us for more journeys into history's forgotten corners, please consider subscribing. Thank you for spending your time with me tonight. May your rest be calm and your dreams be sweet. Until our next story, good night.